Today we're going to be talking about solid domestic waste, also known as trash. The trash that we produce every day. Now the textbook says we produce about 3.5 kilograms of trash per person in the United States. Now that's every day. So there are 2.21 pounds in a kilogram, and we can use our dimensional analysis skills here to figure out that that is 7.7 pounds per day. Now that seemed a little high for me, so I did Google that, and on the EPA's website they estimate that we produce 4.51 pounds of trash per person per day. So either way you look at it, that's a lot of trash. Our learning goal today is to try to describe some strategies that can be used to manage this trash, also known as SDW or solid domestic waste. Kind of interesting stat before we get started here. In 2017, the entire country for the year produced 268 million tons of trash. Of that 268 million tons of trash, roughly 67 million tons were recycled and 27 million tons were composted. Together, that's about 94 million tons that was recycled and composted out of the 268 million tons that we created. Now that's actually better than I thought it was going to be. There's a whole bunch more interesting stats. You can go to EPA.gov and look at the national overview for figures on materials waste and recycling. Once again, we'll be filling out some Cornell notes. We'll put the notes here, we'll put our questions here in this part, and then once again we'll have our summary down at the bottom. If you're doing these on lined paper, you're just going to be copying this onto your lined paper, and then you'll put your questions and your summary at the end. Start out the notes with a vocab alert. I'm sure you guys are excited, and I am too. We've got MEDC. This stands for More Economically Developed Country. For example, the United States, ranking number 1 in GDP out of 211 countries, we would be considered more economically developed. Next, we've got LEDC, less economically developed country. For example, Cuba, ranking 196 out of 211, they would be considered less economically developed. Let's make sure that we are able to distinguish between MEDCs and LEDCs. We'll be referring to trash as SDW or MDW. SDW stands for solid domestic waste. When we say that, that's the same thing as MDW, which is municipal solid waste. These are just other names for trash, really. So it's important to note that when we talk about SDW or MDW, this doesn't include trash that comes from agricultural waste or industrial waste. And MDW, SDW, it only makes up about 5% of the total amount of trash that's produced. But we're focusing on it here because for the most part, it's waste that we can control. It includes all these different things that we see here. Make sure you get the ones filled in on your paper there. Paper, packaging, and food, but it also includes stuff such as glass, paint, batteries, and electronic waste. So technically, when would something be considered SDW or MDW, also known as trash, would be when that material has no value to the person that owns it or to the person that made it. So let's make sure that at this point we are able to define solid domestic waste. Now, we've probably all heard the phrase, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So I just want to take a minute to think about how do we define trash as people who live in an MEDC, and not just any MEDC, the number 1 most economically developed country in the world. And let's just take a look at some things that we might throw out in a normal day, right? We might throw out a pair of old shoes. Maybe you had a bottle of water, you threw out the bottle when you're done. Maybe you ate an apple, you left some over when you finished it. Maybe you had some McDonald's, you had trash left over from that. Then we've got an electronic device, it still works, but we don't want it anymore because the new one came out. So I want you to think about, would someone in an LEDC maybe have a different definition of trash as us living in an MEDC? In many LEDCs, there are entire industries set up to collect SDW that's put into landfills. What they'll do is they'll search for materials that can be recycled, for example, cardboard or plastics or aluminum. They'll scavenge it and then take it to recyclers where they can sell it for a profit. Couple quick things here about waste in general in MEDCs. The book states that up to 50% of SDW is food waste. Now, I googled this one as well, and the number that I kept seeing was closer to 15%. For example, in 2017, the amount of SDW that was made up of food waste was 15.2% in the United States. The book says 50. I don't know, maybe somebody can get to the bottom of that one. Also, we should note that in general, MEDCs have much higher levels of waste than LEDCs. That's on a per capita basis, so per person. You can pause it on this map and take a look at the countries that produce the most SDW. So in general, if the country has a darker red color, it's producing more waste. Think about all the waste that you produce just in one day. And then think about the amount of waste that your entire family produces maybe in a week. Now, keeping that in mind, why would you think there's such a difference in the amount of waste produced by MEDCs versus LEDCs? We're going to take a look at some strategies to minimize the waste that we produce, as well as to dispose of the waste that we produce. But it is important to note that you might hear someone say, oh, we'll just throw it out. There really is no throwing something away. It's going to end up in a landfill somewhere, and it's going to have to be dealt with one way or the other. We're going to talk about the 3 R's. I'm sure we've all heard of these: reduce, reuse, and recycle. We'll be starting with the best of the 3, reducing. Just simply use fewer resources. Also, we can do things such as change shopping habits, which could mean, for example, buying longer lasting goods, or buying items with less packaging, buying goods that are made of recycled parts, avoiding things that are imported. Good luck with that one. Choosing products that are more energy efficient. We don't have to change our entire lifestyles, we just have to be a little bit smarter with purchasing. Next, we have the second R in the 3 R's. We've got reuse. This is where products are used for something other than their original purpose. For example, composting food waste, using old clothes as cleaning rags, or water bottles as planters. And the last of the 3 R's, we've got recycle. This is probably the best known. It's the one you hear the most about. For most of us, we might think of taking specific waste items and throwing it into that blue bin that we put out by the curb. So what happens to that stuff after the trash guy comes and takes it away? The materials are processed for reuse, usually done by professionals. Sometimes you're given incentives from state and local governments, for example, when you return aluminum cans for money. Companies can afford to pay for aluminum cans in this way because aluminum has a high cost of production from the raw material. So recycling from aluminum cans actually saves companies money. There are other strategies aside from the 3 R's that could be used for waste disposal. For example, composting, where biodegradable waste is broken down by decomposers and can then be used as fertilizer. This can be done small scale, for example, at your house, or larger scale done by municipalities or even states. And many times the compost can be sold as fertilizer to the agricultural industry. Next, we've got incineration, which is a strategy of burning waste at extremely high temperatures. The heat produced from incineration can actually be used to create electricity, and the ash can be used for roads. One problem with incineration is the release of toxic chemicals such as dioxins, which is a POP, which can come from burning plastics or batteries. Incineration has positive and negative aspects, and we should be able to discuss these. That brings us to the main method of waste disposal, which is the landfill. Basically, we take all the trash, we find a large location, and we bury it. But it's not just put in a hole in the ground. Usually there's a special structure to prevent things such as ground contamination and the reduction of smells. They'll do this by spreading soil over the trash each day. Landfills have to be close to highly populated areas because of domestic trash pickup. Natural gas or methane is often produced by the fermentation of organic material or food, and this can be simply vented to the atmosphere or captured and used to create electricity. Here we've got a diagram of a typical landfill. It's basically a hole in the ground lined with a plastic liner to prevent leachate from seeping into the groundwater. Leachate is just another name for liquid waste. You've got a soil or a clay covering, as well as a methane recovery system and a leachate recovering system. When the landfill fills up, above the clay or soil cap, they'll put a layer of plastic, and then above that, a layer of gravel for drainage, and then they'll put another layer of soil and cover it with grass. You can see this well over here used to monitor the groundwater for any leachate that might be seeping through. We should be able to discuss the use of landfills as an SDW management strategy. We learned in the story of stuff that most goods are produced in a linear model. We take natural capital, we make goods with it, the goods are sold to consumers, and then they end up in the trash. We know that this type of model is unsustainable. To really manage SDW effectively, we need to move from a linear to a circular model which is sustainable. In a circular model, the producers keep ownership of the goods, and they're sold as services, so the consumer never actually owns the product. And when the products are no longer wanted or needed by the consumer, the producer would take ownership of those goods back and reuse them, recycle them, or refurbish them. This is what's unique about a circular economy. We should make sure we can discuss the idea of moving from a linear to a circular economy and what that would look like. We're at the end of the notes. Don't forget to write your 3 questions and complete your summary.